Hello everyone and welcome to this video tutorial for Shapeways.com. My name is Jonathan Williamson and today I'm going to take you through all the processes needed to prepare a model for 3D printing via Shapeways. So here's the little Suzanne print that I put together, and Suzanne, of course, if you're not familiar, is the monkey mascot for Blender. This is kind of our go-to model for anything testing within Blender. It's a fun little character, and we're going to use it today as an example to prepare. So I'm going to show you how to set up all of the things like the minimum wall thickness, minimum detail size, look at the actual real-world size of the model, and all of the other things that we need to look at and to take into account when we're preparing a model for 3D printing through Shapeways. So let's get started with the basics. So for the basics here, we're just going to use the default cube. And let me first point out that I am using a beta development version of Blender 2.66, which is set to be released in February. But for everything that we're going to be doing in this tutorial, you can use any recent version of Blender, 2.65, 2.64, or a development build as well. Any of them will be fine because I'm not using any fancy tools. We're just going to be looking at the basic modeling tools, scene size, and things like that. So the first thing that let's look at is real-world size. Since we're preparing a model that is actually going to be created as a real-world object, we need to understand how big our model is. So in this case, the little Suzanne print that I did was approximately 3.9 centimeters across from ear to ear. And so we're going to use that as a basic scale for what we're going to be doing today. And so the first thing is, let's look at the scale of our cube. So by default, Blender uses its own units, known as Blender units, or BU. And we can see that our default cube here is 2 by 2 by 2. And in real-world scale, that's equal to 2 meters. So this is actually a really big cube. That's 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters. And we can see this. If we go over to the scene properties here, we can actually change the type of units that our scene is using. So by default, it's none, or Blender units, basically. Next, we can also choose metric or imperial. Now, since Shapeways does everything in metric, and metric is a little bit more accurate for smaller scales and such, or a little bit easier to read, we're going to be using metric today. And you can see that our dimensions are set to 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters. So this is perfect. So what we can do is, if we wanted to do a 4 centimeter print, so 4 by 4 by 4, then we could simply change this to 4 cm by 4 cm by 4 cm. And you can see, obviously, now it looks really, really tiny. But if we just zoom in right in here, and maybe what we can do is we can just go down to View, change Align to View, and View Selected. That will just zoom right in on it so that we can then see it. And you can see that we've got a nice sized cube. Now, one other thing that you'll notice, though, as we zoom in here, you'll notice that the cube kind of starts to disappear. And this is because we're in perspective mode. So we could either hit numpad 5 and toggle out of perspective mode, or we can go down here. Since we're working with really small sizes, by default, Blender works with fairly large real-world size models generally. But since this is very small, basically the OpenGL clipping for the camera in the viewport is too short. So the viewing distance is starting too far away. So if we just here within the viewport properties, which you can bring up by hitting N, you can just toggle down View and then go down here to the start and just set this to maybe, say, 1 millimeter. And that way it's really small. So that way you can see your entire model really well. All right, so now we've got our cube. So with our cube now, let's go ahead and just look at one of the key components of 3D printing, and that is creating a hollow model. So when we're doing a 3D print, oftentimes we want to make the model hollow because this will allow us to save an immense amount of material. With a cube like this, you might say pay $25 to $30 for a solid cube like this that's 4 by 4 by 4 centimeters, or for a hollow model, you might pay just a couple of dollars. So let's go and hollow this out. And by the way, just real quick, I'm going to be applying all of this to the actual Suzanne model here in just a moment. But first, let's just look at the absolute basics with the cube because it'll be a little bit easier to see and illustrate this. So the way that we can add thickness to this model, because right now, if we just look at it, if we were to go into edit mode, we can see that we have just a single face. There is no thickness to this other than from one side to the other. That is our thickness. But we would like this to be hollow. So, it would look something like that from the side. So we'll have actual thickness to this. So what we can do is we can use what's called a solidify modifier. And for this tutorial, I'm assuming that you're already familiar with modifiers. If there's anything in this tutorial that you miss, something you can check out is on blendercookie.com. Just go on the top tab and there's a Blender Basics series that will give you all the absolute basics of Blender to help you out. So this tutorial does assume that you have basic knowledge of Blender for things like rotating around the viewport, working with object and edit mode, and working with modifiers. So let's keep going here. So on the modifiers, we're going to add a modifier, and we're going to use the solidify modifier. And this does exactly what it sounds like in that it allows us to add thickness. And so you can see if I then adjust this thickness slider here, that interior wall becomes larger and larger. But you can see by default, this was set to 1 centimeter. But that doesn't look right. We know that our cube is 4 centimeters in all directions. So this wall should be more like right here, approximately. So that's not quite right. And the reason for this is you may remember in the beginning, I adjusted the dimensions right here. Well, by adjusting the dimensions, this actually adjusted the scale as well. And what this has then done is basically changed the scale of the actual object, but it has not changed Blender's perception of the size of the object. So as far as Blender's concerned, this object is still 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters, but then it's only displaying that object, or basically it's modifying that object to then shrink it down. So any of these settings are applied before this shrinkage. So this 1 centimeter is being applied assuming this object is still really big. So what we need to do is we need to zero out this scale, or basically return the scale to 1. So we can do this by hitting Control A and apply scale. And you can see immediately that brings it right back out. This is now 1 to 1 to 1, and our 1 centimeter thickness is now accurate. Now, based on Shapeways, the minimum wall thickness varies by the material. But for this tutorial and the print that I did of Suzanne, I used the white, strong, and flexible. This is the most common Shapeways material, and it's a really nice balance of strength, of flexibility, and detail size. And for the strong, white, and flexible, our minimum thickness is 0.7 millimeters. So let's just go ahead and use that as our minimum. So we can do 0.7 millimeters. You'll see Blender will automatically change the display mode to this. There's no way around that, but just be aware that that's what it's doing. And there we go. So this model would almost work. But right now, as far as Shapeways is concerned, this model is still solid. And the reason being is that if this were to be printed, this interior would all be filled with basically powder that would then need to be removed. And so what we need to do is we need to add what's called an escape hole. And an escape hole is exactly what it sounds like. It's just basically a hole in the model that then allows the printer, the person maintaining the printer or actually working with the prints to actually dump out all of the interior material. So what we can do then is, in this case, this is pretty simple. We just basically need to create a hole in the bottom of the object. So let's select this bottom face here. You'll notice that I'm in face select mode, and I can simply hit I to bring up my inset tool and then just create an inset like this. And that's just giving me a new face right here that then I can remove. But first, let's check the escape hole size. So a good general rule of thumb is an escape hole of 2 millimeters. Now, this will depend a little bit on the actual structure of your model and may be a bit of a case-by-case basis, but 2 millimeters is probably a good starting point for you, and then you can scale it up larger or smaller if needed based on feedback from the Shapeways maintainers. So going here, I'm just going to switch to the bottom view, which I can do with just Control 7. And I want to check the size of this. So these are my millimeters right here. Since you can see that our grid units are nicely lined up where each major grid unit is 1 centimeter, each minor is a millimeter. So right now I can see that this is approximately 8 millimeters across. So let's just scale this down. We'll just go to 4 millimeters. That'll be a little bit larger. So we'll go to right there. So I just hit S to scale, and then I'm just scaling down to approximately fit. And then to make sure it's accurate, I'll just hit Shift S, and this brings up my snapping menu, just Shift S, and I can choose Selection to Grid. And that will snap each one of these vertices based on my current view, which is flat or top or bottom, and it will just snap it right to the nearest grid unit. So Selection to Grid, and that way it's nice and accurate. To see that a little bit more clearly, let's just scale it up, and then Selection to Grid, and you can see it snaps right in. So then all I need to do to create this escape hole is hit X and delete the face. And that then gives me a hole within my model with the thickness that then I can create. So this model is now basically ready for print. We've got the real world size, 4 centimeters. We have applied the scale. We have a solidify modifier set to 0.7 millimeters in thickness, which is the minimum wall thickness. And we have an escape hole of 2 millimeters. So this is now ready to go, and we can now export this to any of the variety of formats that are supported, including OBJ, STL, Collada, etc. But let's look at a real-world example now. Let's go ahead and look at how to create Suzanne. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to hit X and delete this, and we're going to hit Shift-A, add a mesh and a monkey. And the monkey then I want to create and get ready for 3D printing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it way, way down. And I'm just going to hit S and scale. Since we don't have basically constraints on these to scale all of these as we modify one, I just have to use the S key and then just scale it down until it's about right. And so I'll just scale it along the X-axis to be about 4 centimeters. It doesn't need to be exact. Although, there we go. Okay, got it exactly at 4 centimeters. So this is 4 centimeters from ear to ear, since that's the X-axis. So now that I've done that, let's go and hit Control-A and apply the scale. Next, right now my monkey is very blocky, and so we're going to see all of these facets in the print. And you may want that, particularly if you're a modeler, you may kind of like that because it's cool designs and such. But let's assume that you want it nice and smooth, because you've put a lot of work into a model, you want it smooth. So let's add in a subdivision surface modifier. And I'm just going to increase the resolution on this to 3. That way we don't see any of this smoothing. Because when you print your model on Shapeways, it doesn't understand the difference between flat and smooth shading. We've got smooth shading for showing the model smooth in Blender, but Shapeways doesn't understand that, because it's looking at the actual 3D printers. So you want your mesh to be a high enough resolution that the surface is nice and smooth. You may need a little bit of additional sanding after the fact, but this should be close enough. So this way it'll come out pretty nice and smooth. So now that we have this model, there's a couple of things that we need to take into account that were not an issue with the cube. The first thing is non-manifold edges. So I'm not going to worry about the description of what non-manifold edges actually are. And by the way, I'm going to turn the subsurf modifier off in edit mode just so I can see the actual mesh. But basically, for the time being, think of a non-manifold edge or mesh as anything that is either open-sided, so it's not completely watertight, or that is shared, a single edge that's shared by 3 or more faces. So in this case, if we go in here, let's just go into wireframe mode, and I go down to select, and I choose non-manifold. You'll see it's going to select the rings around the eyes. And this is because if we go and hit Control L, or excuse me, Shift, no, let me just select, I'm going to select one eyeball here with L and hit Shift H to hide everything else. You can see that this set of edges is open. And this is a big no-no in Shapeways, or not in Shapeways, but in 3D printing. One of the requirements for 3D printers is that the model be watertight. So in other words, you can't have any open edges like this. So what we can do to solve this is we can simply go in here and add in a solidify modifier again. And obviously that's not what we want because this is really, really thick. So let's set this to, again, the minimum thickness of 0.7 millimeters. And that gives us our minimum wall thickness. So then what we can do is we're going to just move this above, or no, we'll keep it right where it's at. Because what this has now done is if we select the eye again and hit Shift H, and then look at it, you can see that it's added thickness to this. So now this is considered a watertight model. And now since these two models are intersecting, it will consider these whole and basically just print them together. However, you can see that there is a small gap right here. So what I want to do is I'm going to hit Alt-H. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to select this edge in the eye, and I'm just going to scale it in to make sure that it's intersecting nicely with the actual eye. But so that I don't have to do that on both sides, I'm going to start by selecting one half of my model. So I can just go into wireframe view, or wireframe down here, or by pressing Z, and then hit 1 to go to front view, and then I'm going to hit B to bring up my box select, and just drag across the left half of the model, hit X, and delete the vertices. Because now what I can do is I can go in here and add in a mirror modifier, And that will just add it symmetrically across the origin point right here. So if your origin point is off, you just need to be sure to reposition that origin point via this operator. In object mode, you can see the operator right here for origin. There we are. And then what we need to do is right now, the mirror modifier is at the bottom of the stack, but modifiers are applied in order. So first the subsurf is added, then the solidify is added, then the mirror. So we want to add the mirror above the subsurf and the solidify. That way the subsurf considers it one whole model, as does the solidify. Okay, so let's select the inside of the eye here. And I can do this by just Alt right-clicking on the edge loop. So I just Alt right-click on one of the edges, and then I can just scale it in to the eye. And that will just ensure that we have good, even thickness throughout. So now, but since I've destroyed a little bit of that detail, I might also want to just accent this a little bit. So, basically I can just tweak the model to make it a little bit nicer. Maybe I will add in a little bit more sharpness here. So I might just Alt right click to select this edge. And then I can hit Control B, which will bring up my bevel tool. And that will just add in just split that edge into two, just like that. So that just sharpens up that a little bit and just makes it a little bit nicer. And maybe we'll bring that in just a bit more. Okay, so that gives me my eyes. The eyes are now good to go. But now we need to see a couple of other things. So first of all, you can see that we've got a problem with the ears right here, where the back side of the ear is poking through. And obviously we don't want this. So we need to go in and solve that. So here's what we need to do is basically just grab the inside of the ears and pull them back. So I'm just going to do this the simple way and just select the back sides of the ears here. And we're simply just going to pull them back. And we'll give them a little bit of extra, you'll never really notice in the 3D print if the ears are slightly thicker than the actual original model, but that should be fine. And then what we need to do is we just need to ensure that that thickness right there between these surfaces is 0.7 millimeters. So if we just select this, we can go in here, and if we just hit with this single vertex, I can go in here, I can turn on this edge length option right here. And then I can just temporarily extrude that along the y-axis by hitting E and Y, and then select the edge, and I can see that it is 3.25 millimeters. So it's plenty thick. So now I can just delete that vertex and we're good to go. Okay, so that gives me my ears. And the eyes are done. So now let's just look at a few more things, and we can see that we might have an issue down in here where this seems a little bit weird. So what I'm going to, and we can also see that the nose is kind of intersecting on itself here as well. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to apply the solidify modifier. So let's just click apply, and it will warn you that it was not first, result may not be expected. Actually, you know what, let's undo that, because really what we should do is we should put this above the subsurf modifier, and just to give us a little bit of extra breathing room, let's go and set this to say 0.9 millimeters. That will just make sure it's a little bit thicker, and then we'll apply that. Because one of the things you need to realize is that with the subsurf modifier, since it's smoothing it and shrinking it just a little bit, that thickness is going to be just a little bit less than you might have originally had. So you can see here, this thickness here is, well, it looks to be, just a little over a millimeter, so it's about 0.9 millimeters. As soon as we add in the subdivision surface, that's going to be just a little bit less. So you just need to be aware of that. Okay, now when we did that, we did manage to mess up the mirror because the solidify wasn't first. So you can see that we now have this inside edge that I made right here. So we just need to be sure to select the whole inside set of vertices like this. Let's enable our clipping option, and we're just going to pull that over along the x-axis. We can select this whole center line like this. We're going to pull them in towards the x-axis, and with the clipping, it'll set it to automatically lock. And now I can just hit X and delete the faces. Let's also turn off the edge length temporarily, and let's just disable the mirror while in edit mode so that then we can grab these few faces in here that also were missing. And so now I'll just select each of these faces that were there, hit X, delete the faces. We'll do the same thing here with the nose. So you can see that there's a couple extra ones here. And we just want to be sure that these are not being added in the final model. So let's just delete those, and there we go. See, now you can see where things were a little bit funky with the inside of the nose from the solidify modifier. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select all of these stray vertices, and we're going to delete them. So this may look a little bit messy initially, but this is just kind of one of those things that you have to do when working with small details and a solidify modifier, because sometimes it doesn't quite know what to do with them. Okay, so that should be good. That looks good. And now what we want to do is we just need to basically fill in that area. So one thing you'll notice is that we did accidentally remove a part of the nose. So we're just going to fill that in. Then we can take this. We'll fill that. We will fill this. There we go. So that gives us the nose back. Maybe we can pull this back down a little bit just to make sure that we're maintaining that original heart form. You know, we don't want to mess up her nose or anything. Now, one thing you'll see here is that we're having a little bit of issue with the merge limit here. And this is due to working with a very small size, where the merge limit is set to 1 millimeter. But this, I would guess, is not 1 millimeter. So if we select this, we can see that this is under 1 millimeter. And so basically, as soon as I activate a transform on this, it's automatically snapping it to the edge. So let's just take our merge limit down to 0.01 millimeter. And that way, I can manipulate this much more freely without it just automatically snapping. So if I now just take these, there we go. So that just kind of restores a little bit of her heart-shaped nose that we want. Okay, and now I need to work on the back side here. So what I have is I need to take this, bring it back, and basically I just need to fill this area. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll just fill it with an Ingon. So this is going to be a little bit messy, but it'll allow me to then just clean it up real easily. So I can just select this area from the inside and hit F to fill it. And then I'm going to just start merging a few of these vertices. We really don't care about triangles or anything like that, but we do want to make sure we don't have any Ingons, just so that we can ensure exactly how it's being created. So now with these two vertices, just to remove this Ingon, you can see I've got 5 vertices. I'm just going to select the 2 vertices, hit J, and that will merge them together. And so now if we select, there we go, yeah. So that should work. And now right now you can see that our inside and outside are still connected, which is fine because we've got it around the eyes. So now let's go down to the mouth and let's try and clean it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this. If I just alt-right click on this edge loop, you can see it's inside here. So I'll just hit X, delete that edge loop, and that immediately helps kind of clean things up. And then I can just bring these out. And basically, what I want to do is, I just want to be sure we don't have any of these weird little crevices here, because that's just going to make things a little bit messy. It's not necessarily going to clear out well if, you know, they try and dump out the powder. And so it's probably just best that we remove it. There we go. So now I can maybe just remove that edge as well. And so it's just kind of cleaning things up. Now, there's no real art to this, and so if you're a little bit lost as I'm doing this, you know, this is not specific to this model or anything like that. Basically, I'm just trying to remove any of those overlapping areas, make sure that we've got sufficient thickness in those areas, and just be sure that there's just not any weird discrepancies within our mesh. So there's no real fancy steps or anything here. It's just, you know, kind of working through it. And these kind of requirements will vary a bit on each model that you do. You know, each one will be slightly different. And that should do it. Okay, so now if we look at this, everything should be good. Since we increased the thickness on our ears, we're good to go on that. Now, one thing that we could have done if we wanted to is we could have simply removed the inside of the ears and made the ears technically solid, which may have been a good way to go. Because if we actually go in here and we look at the ears, let's just select this area. Make sure we've got the whole ear selected like this. We'll hit Shift H. We can see the inside there is actually hollow, but I don't think that'll be a problem. You know, that's kind of the way it's meant to be. But since this is a small area, you know, it might be nice if that were not hollow, but we're going to go ahead and just leave it as is, because since we added the additional thickness, it should be just fine. Okay, so that gives us our model, and we are basically ready to print. But there's one more thing that we need to check. Since we've been working on our model, one thing we need to do is we need to verify that we don't have any mixed up normals. So let's go down here, and we're going to display normals. And let's just change the size down to, say, 0.5 millimeter. That'll make it nice and small. Actually, let's go ahead and do, say, 1 centimeter. We'll do 3 millimeter. There we go. Okay, so each of these blue lines represents the direction that the face is pointing. And we just need to ensure that these are all going the same way, that we don't have any pointing in or any pointing in like that. And everything looks good. We might have, go into face mode here. We might have one funky one right in there, but I don't think so. I think that's just, yeah, that's just poking through right there. So that's okay. Everything looks good. Now, if you had some inconsistent ones, you could simply select it and hit Control N, and that would attempt to fix them. Another way that you can check is with your model. If you enable smooth shading here, anywhere that you have mixed up normals, you'll see black lines. And in this case, we don't. But just to demo this, let's just select this one. And we're going to hit Control-Shift-N, which will force the normal to flip. And now you can see we've got a black spot on there. So this indicates that there's a normal that's incorrect. So I can just go back, reflip it, and there we go. Okay, this model is now ready for 3D printing. Now, one thing that I found that works best, if you want your model to be orientated correctly within the Shapeways shop, such that the front of the model, or the face, in this case, this, is facing the camera, then it's always good to to rotate the model just a little bit. So in this case, if I just rotate the model 90 degrees around the x-axis, this now seems like it's down in Blender, but that's actually front in Shapeways, because basically Blender is a Z-up application, and many applications, including 3D printing, are Y-up. So we just need to basically orientate the model 90 degrees, and then it will be display correctly. Now, just be aware that this will not affect the way that it prints. However, okay, I just realized, though, is we did forget one key component of our print, and that is we didn't put in the escape hole. So right now, as far as Shapeways is concerned, this model is still solid. So what we need to do is we need to punch a hole right in here. So probably the easiest way to do this is with a Boolean modifier. So let's just hit Shift-A, add in a mesh and a cylinder, because I want to punch a hole. And this cylinder, we're going to take down to be the size of our escape hole, and that is 2 millimeters. So we're gonna, just to make sure we have a little bit extra room, let's do 2.5 millimeters. So we'll just take it down like that. 2.5 by 2.5. We'll zoom in on it. And we could go ahead and scale this up along the z-axis longer just to make sure we've got the extra room, like that. And then I can simply rotate this around. Let's position it somewhere around the back where, you know, if you can imagine, Suzanne kind of lays on her back like this. So it'd probably be best if the hole was right in this area so that you don't really see it. So we could say do something like that. And then we can go in here. Let's just toggle these down. We can add in a new Boolean modifier and then choose that cylinder as the Boolean. Now, right now it's set to intersect, and we just want to change the mode to difference. And that will literally punch a hole in the model. So if we now hide this, you can see it there. Now, you'll see that the smoothing has been a little bit messed up. It's not real clean. So what I'm going to do to make this a little bit smoother is we can just move this above the subsurf modifier. Or actually, no, we don't want to do it above the subsurf modifier because that just gets really messy. We'll just leave it right where it's at. That's okay. You know, we can always clean those areas up later. So bringing this back, one thing you might do too, dependent on the shape of your model, it may be a good idea to add in multiple holes. So in this case, I might just position this one here, and you'll notice it's pretty slow with the Booleans applied. And then I'll duplicate this. I might position another one here, and then I can copy this modifier and add in a cylinder 0.001. And now I'll just select both of these. I'll hide it, and there we have it. So now if we wanted to clean this up, we certainly could, and that might actually be a really good idea. So what I'm going to do is, when you're ready for printing, it's good to go ahead and apply your modifiers. You can apply it at export, but if you want to really clean things up, it's probably best to apply manually. So I'm going to hit Shift-D to duplicate this model. And then I'm going to move this model to a new layer by hitting M and then move it to layer 2. And this then is going to basically be, essentially I've just created a backup model. So now I can go in here and I can apply each of these modifiers from top down to give me my final result. So I'll apply that, I'll apply that, I'll apply that, and I'll apply that. So now if I look at my mesh, everything is applied. Let's turn off the normals. And now I just want to clean up these areas just because, we might see a little bit of artifacts around that when it prints. Probably not because it's a pretty nice smooth surface. But just in case, to help make sure it's nice and consistent, if we just go in here, select all of these insides, or actually, you know what? Let's just go in here. Let's select this edge loop, or we'll go to vertex mode. We're going to select all of these vertices. We have to do it a little bit manually, but that's okay. There we go. And we can just start cleaning things up. So one thing that we might do is we might go ahead and bevel this, although this might get a little bit funky here. Oops, looks like we missed a vertex there. So I'll bevel this, and that will just give me a slightly nicer edge, although you will see that there's a few iffy areas throughout this where things like this are happening. So you might want to go in, you can start merging these together. We've got some duplicate and stray vertices all throughout here that we would want to resolve. So one thing that we might do is select everything, hit W and remove doubles, and that will remove a whole bunch of vertices. And you can see our merge distance is really small, so that's fine. So that helps clean things up immediately, and then we can continue any additional cleanup that we wish. But I'm going to leave that for another day. There's no need to do that within this tutorial. Although we might do things like if we delete, say, this edge loop right here, that then allows this to merge a little bit nicer, and just some additional things like that. So doing stuff like that can help just kind of clean it up, give you a little bit more control over the model. It's not just a matter of making it nice and clean for printing, it's also making it easier for you, the artist, to modify the model and make it the way that you want to make it. So if you ever want to make any changes on this, then that's a little bit more difficult to do when it's a little bit messy like this. So going in and making those little cleanup changes can really help. But you can already start to see how this is helping a lot, particularly if we were to say go in and just smooth out that little part. Maybe we'll smooth out this one here, just hitting W and smooth. And before long, we can really start to get a nice clean result that's going to work very, very nicely. So there you have it. There is a model that should be pretty much ready to go. Now, whenever you send this off to the printer, you may come back with an error or two where perhaps, one small area in here might not be quite thick enough. So then it's simply a matter of going in, selecting that area, which you would probably want to do on your original model, not on the applied one, which is why I duplicated that. So, if you needed to add a little bit more thickness here at the top, because maybe there's one area that's a little under the minimum wall thickness, just going in, adding a little thickness can then clear those areas right up and make you ready for printing. So there you have it. There is preparing a model for 3D printing in Blender for Shapeways. This is a fairly good example of a lot of the minimum things. Some models, of course, are going to be quite a bit more complicated than this. If you've got a lot of really small objects such as teeth or fingers, or if you're working on an object with moving parts and things like that, there's going to be some other things to take into account, but these are all the basics and should put you well on your way to creating 3D prints within Blender.